Good evening. Hi, everybody. I'm still Martha Minow, and it is my enormous pleasure to welcome John Osborn here for the Paper Chase 40th Anniversary Celebration event. And I just was saying to him that I've been very much looking forward to this event because I am a Paper Chase fan. It influenced my life, my career. Here I am. And I'm going to ask some questions, and then we'll open it up to you all. So my first question is, what struck you when you first started law school, and how have your thoughts about law school changed since that time?
Okay, I want to thank you and the law school for asking me to come back here. It's just, it's an amazing thing to walk around here and remember. When I came to law school, it was in the middle of the Vietnam War.
Yes.
The college was in incredible chaos. And, the strike at Harvard and taking over University Hall, and nothing was happening in the law school. It was like a center of complete calm. And that's what was one of the first things that struck me. How could that be? How can this not be influencing the law school? That was the first thing. The second thing that struck me was, having gone to Harvard College. Harvard College is an incredibly diverse place. It's very hard to pick up what the theme is. There's Eliot House, there's Adams House, and Eliot is supposed to be preppy and Adams is supposed to be arty, but who knows? And so there are all kinds of environments there, but you got to Harvard Law School and it was one environment. It said one thing, and that was kind of cool. I mean, it was like, this is our message. And that message was Langdell Hall. We didn't have all this new, plush, incredible student stuff. There was Langdell Hall, which is a Romanesque, huge columns on the outside. That architect was fabulous, because he not only put columns on the outside, he put them on the inside. And you saw Langdell Hall, and it was like when Russell Crowe finally gets to Rome in Gladiator. I said, oh my God, look at that thing. And so that was the first thing that struck me about Harvard College, was that it was Harvard Law School, was that it was a unified experience. And then the next thing was that it glorified professors. If you go into Langdell Hall, hung all around Langdell Hall are these huge oil portraits of Harvard law professors, with the little spotlight going up on them, and they glare down at you in their black coats.
Not so many of those anymore, but all right.
There's a lot. I was just there. I counted. I didn't count them, but there were a lot. There were 20. And if you went, I don't know. This is, by the way, that's unfair. We're going to have an argument here, because this is about what I remember at Harvard Law School, not the way it is now.
Oh, that's right. That's great.
Anyway. And the classrooms in Langdell were the same way. All of those pictures were pictures when I went there of Harvard law professors. And maybe they've all been removed, but that's the way it was. I mean, what kind of an institution glorifies the teachers? I mean, I had this feeling when I came that it was supposed to be about the law students, but it wasn't. So those were my initial impressions.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
And how have your thoughts about your experience, how did that affect your decision to write a novel?
There was, so this thing I said about the revolution on campus, actually there was a lot of stuff going on at the law school. It just wasn't shared among other law schools. And part of the paper chase was a reaction against the status quo. It was saying, why are they doing this? Why do we have to put up with this stuff in law school? I mean, and then if you thought about it, my favorite law professor at that point was Lon Fuller, who I became his research assistant, and he was preaching reciprocity in contract class. And yet there was no reciprocity in the classrooms. There was something wrong with that. So these were thoughts that were occurring on other law schools, campuses as well. And the paper chase is an expression of that. In part, it's an expression of that. But it was also, by the time I started writing it as a third-year student, it was also a way to find another narrative for myself. Because I knew that my narrative was to go to Wall Street and work in a large law firm, and that was going to be it. You know, and I had already worked in a large law firm after my second year, and that didn't look like something I wanted to do for my whole life. So the paper chase was like, let's put some other things on the table. Let's see what else is going on.
Was it fun to write?
I had an incredible gift with the paper chase, which was that I knew from the beginning where the book was going. And that was just like a gift. And I knew that was a gift. You know, I've written 4 novels, and the paper chase is the only one where I knew where it was going to end up. And I knew it would end up with Hart looking at Kingsfield and saying, Professor, I want you to know that I enjoyed your course. And Kingsfield looking at him and saying, what was your name? So the whole idea of writing it was to get everything going down the railroad tracks, the different plots and everything, so that they would echo, and when they finally collided at that final scene, it would work, it would be explosive. And there's a trick. There's a trick to that scene, which is, the question is, does Kingsfield know his name? The answer is, of course.
He does.
Of course. They've been in class all year long. Hart's the brightest guy in contracts. He's incredible. You know, he's been battling out, and Kingsfield says, what was your name? Of course he knows the name. You know, and Hart is going out with Kingsfield's daughter. And you think Kingsfield doesn't know his name? But if the book works right, when you get to that end, you're not sure. You're not sure if he knows. And when I first met John Houseman, before we started shooting the movie, we were shooting some takes of Houseman to try to convince Fox to use him. And the first question he asked me was, he said, does Kingsfield know his name? Even Houseman,
Wow,
so I
wasn't
thought,
sure.
my God, it worked. Houseman doesn't understand, and he's going to be the character. He doesn't know. And maybe Kingsfield doesn't know. God knows.
And he got the Academy Award for the role.
And he got the Academy Award.
So one of the things that happens in the film, and I wondered if you thought about this as you were writing the book, is that initially Kingsfield is the center of the shots in the film. And he's larger than life, like those portraits.
Yeah.
And you know, the poor little law student is this little things. But over time, the angles shift and the size shifts, and by the end, it's really equal.
This is why she's the dean. You know, I mean it. This is incredibly smart. So our cameraman was a guy named Gordon Willis, who shot The Godfather.
Oh, wow.
And after the movie was over, I went to his house, and I spent 3 days taping him, which was the smartest thing I ever did, because when I started writing network television, that all came back to me in spades. Anyway, he was just hammering us. How are we going to express this book visually? And so he said, okay, Hart is going to be lost in the crowd, and Kingsfield's going to be in close-up, and they are going to battle each other until, at the end, Hart has managed to put himself right in the frame equally with Kingsfield. He'll be the same size.
Wow.
Now, to make that really, really work, because we had our own classroom. We had built this incredible classroom in a soundstage in Toronto. Everything was movable. So this wall right here could be moved back, and was. So when you shot Hart, you're actually shooting him from an extra 30 feet back. So he's really lost in the crowd. I mean, he's much more lost than what Kingsfield's seeing him at. You know, and when you're shooting the other way, of course, we didn't need to do that. But
That's
yeah,
amazing.
it is. And we could do other tricks in that classroom. We could use different lenses, and we could get your face and your face in, stick a couple of extra lenses in the camera, and everybody else is fuzzy around. It was amazing what Gordon Willis could do.
Wow.
So that's what that was about.
What do you hope people remember from the book, from the movie, from the TV show?
Boy, that's a tough question. First of all, I'm just amazed that people still remember it, because I wrote another book called The Associates, which was also a television series, which was on all the bestseller lists, and 3 or 4 years later, nobody remembers it. And that's the fate of most novels, even when they're on the top of the bestseller list. If I asked you the bestseller list from 3 years ago, none of you would know what it is. So I'm incredibly grateful that it's there. And I think it's there because of this feeling about the classroom experience. I mean, that was the hardest part. You asked what was hard.
Yeah.
The hardest part was writing the classroom scenes. Almost a third of the book are classroom scenes. And to make classroom scenes dramatic was really, really hard. And I didn't want to do it because it was so hard. And I had this fabulous editor. And she said, no, John, you've got to write these classroom scenes. This is what's going to make this book.
They look like lessons plans to me. I mean, they're detailed. The question, answer, question, answer, question, answer,
well,
very substantive.
I tell you something that shocked me. The Carnegie Corporation did that book on law schools. They quoted the paper chase.
Throughout the report.
Yeah, and they said this is an example of, and they looked at Kingsfield's different modes of teaching. Mm-hmm. And that was basically because that part I took from the classroom. I mean, you know, I'd been there watching it and just got it.
Wow.
Yeah.
So what led you to teach law?
First of all, law is a wonderful thing to do. Teaching law is really great. And it's also one of those jobs, it's a cushy job, guys. Really a cushy job.
Better than, more psychic gain than the law firm, is that what it is?
Much more. The law firm is a dehumanizing environment. Mm-hmm. And except for a couple of people I know who've had a great time doing it. But.
And what's it like to be Kingsfield, or are you Kingsfield? What's it like to be on that side of the podium?
Well, I don't do the straight Socratic method, so I don't call on anybody. You have to raise your hand because I'm not a genius. I'm not psychic. I don't know what students have, whether they have something to say. But you do have to raise your hand. So if you're going to have trouble raising your hand, you have to come and see me, and then we will go over the question so that you know it absolutely cold, and then you'll raise your hand and nobody will know that you've gone over it and you'll look like a genius. But you know, the only time when we violate that rule is if your mother or father comes to class, and then you're going to be called on. And I did have one student who, there was this elderly woman sitting right next to her, and so I called her and I said, I didn't raise my hand. And I said, well, you have brought your mother to class. She looks and said, that's not my mother. You know? And the mom looked so shocked at this denial by her daughter.
Oh, a little bit like Kingsfield not knowing heart.
Yeah.
Is there a picture or an actual law professor that you imagine, fictional or non-fictional, that you have in your mind when you're teaching?
Well, if I'm teaching contracts, I try to keep Lon Fuller in my mind because he was just so smart, you know, and he was always looking for the stuff beneath the rules. He wasn't interested. He was so aware of the narrative, you know. He was just, so I try to keep in mind, and I have my set of all of his notes, and then I worked for him as his research assistant, so I got to talk about this stuff with him. So I try to channel him, and I use his book.
So you've modified the Socratic method. You don't have a cold call, but you still use a question and answer.
Yes.
So would you view that as partly a Socratic method, and what do you think is valuable about that way of teaching?
I view it as wonderful, but well, first of all, it's theatrical. I mean, the Socratic method is really theatrical, and you can make it theatrical, and that's wonderful. You know, why not? Why shouldn't it be fun? Why why
and riveting. Sure.
And riveting, exactly. So I try to do that. You know, I'm kind of losing what the question was. But
well, just about Socratic method and what's worth, what's valuable in it, and can it be done without scaring people?
Yeah, I don't think the students are scared of my class because they know they're not going to be called on. You know, so there's that out. But then they want to talk. That's the thing. They want to talk. I want the students to get control of my class. And that is what Lon Fuller did, by the way. This was such a lesson. You know, as we got toward the end of the class, he said, this has got to be your class. He said, because I'm going to stop teaching. And he said, and I'm not going to stop teaching on the last day of class. I'm going to stop teaching before the last day of class. So you've got to get used to taking over this classroom. And, you know, and he said it in this very calm, southern, gentlemanly kind of drawl. It was not, and, you know, and we tried to do that. And then the last couple of classes, he didn't teach. He just took a seat in the classroom.
Wow.
And, you know, and he had asked for volunteers, and 3 students came up and ran the class.
Wow.
You know? I mean, that's what he was trying to get across.
Well, at its best, don't you think that this mode of teaching actually develops in students the set of questions to have for themselves with any new problem ever again, and be able to generate the questions, to be able to be on both sides of the podium, as it were?
Okay, I mean, I agree with that to an extent, but I don't agree with that we are teaching them to think like a lawyer, because I don't think we can teach them to think any different way than they think. You know, I don't think anybody, you know, that's an innate thing in your brain. Now, we can teach them to be questioning, and we can teach them to stuff, but it's not like we're teaching them something totally new.
So I didn't know until preparing for today that your daughter graduated from this school. So this is very fascinating to me. How did she come to the school? Did you try to talk her into it or out of it? And how would you compare what you learned about her experience with what you remember from your own? And there are seats here if you want to come forward.
You know, she had an experience like mine. She went to Harvard College, and then she went to Harvard Law School. But she was born to go to Harvard Law School. So, you know, she came here and she loved every minute of law school. It was just amazing. You know, and you know, there's no comparison. She graduated magna. I mean, there wasn't any chance in hell I was going to graduate magna. You know, I mean, and she just loved it. So, and I loved living vicariously through her and absorbing how much she liked Harvard Law School. And you asked whether I was.
Yes.
I have to admit, I wanted her to go to Harvard Law School. So I did badmouth Stanford. And I asked her, you know, how could anybody go to that place? You know, God, look at that architecture, and you know. Anyway,
no pillars.
Yeah, but then I got scared. Like, what if she doesn't get into Harvard? And then so, if you can believe this shows the new Harvard Law School. So on the admissions day, I get a call from the dean's office. And I'd been very friendly with Bob Clark. I'd done some fundraising things, and we just wanted to tell you, John, that your daughter got in. And that was just so nice.
That's very nice.
You know, I mean, because it was a huge relief. Then I had to not tell her she got in. You know, so.
Did you share your notes with her?
No, I have a beautiful set of these Fuller notes.
Wow.
But. You know, she didn't want my notes. She just, but you know, if you want to know how the law school has changed, so, you know, she just looked up to Elizabeth Warren. You know, I mean, what a role model, you know, to have. And so she looked up to Elizabeth Warren, and now she's working at the agency that Elizabeth Warren created. It's just, you know, this wasn't going on when I was at Harvard Law School. So.
Though if we were to remake the film of The Paper Chase, I was thinking you might want to have Kingsfield to be a woman like Elizabeth Warren. Pretty tough Socratic questioner, actually.
That's an interesting question. I've seen film of Elizabeth Warren teaching, and she's pretty nice.
Yeah, well, okay.
Kingsfield is a real son of a bitch. You know? And if you reread the book, you see how bad he is. In the TV show, he isn't. He has to be made, you know, in a television show.
More congenial. We couldn't look at him week after week. The scene, the famous scene about here's a dime, go call your mother. I wonder how you could do that today, because everyone has their cell phone. So
yeah, that's a problem.
That's a problem.
Yeah.
You know, you are, you know, a superb role model for our many students who want to become writers. And there are a surprising number of Harvard Law graduates who go on to become writers, many of them fiction writers. We have many novelists, many playwrights. And I wonder, you know, what, if any, advice would you give to our students or alums who want to write?
You know, I get that question a lot. And it's a hard one because you know, the people who want to be writers kind of know it. You know, if you really, it's such a painful thing to be a fiction writer. dealing with rejection and, and just sitting there with a little computer,
blank screen,
exactly,
blank page,
blank screen, blank mind, and you just so they know it. If they're willing to put themselves through that kind of hell. And if you're not it's not going to work. I've never written a book where I didn't have a point where I actually thought this is useless. This is absolutely useless. It's never going to get done. I'm not smart enough. I don't know the answer. And I'm just completely, and then something happens and it opens up and I understood it. So.
My sister recommends what she calls the Minow mode of writing. You write with one hand, you hold your nose with the other one.
Yeah.
So.
Well, that's a good, if you're doing television, that's a good.
I do want to come back to Paper Chase just for a moment because it is remarkable that novel, movie, TV, 3 different formats. What difference did the different formats make? And you suggest that, at least in television, Kingsfield had to be made more likable. Are there other ways in which the adaptation across the media matter?
I actually believe that the book is the best for, we could talk about that, and I think it's a pretty good book. The movie, we really lucked out. The movie is almost a literal transcription of the book. And I had input into that, and almost every time where it wasn't, I got it reversed. And there was only one place where I really couldn't move them. And that was where Hart says to Susan, you lied to me, Susan. You told me your last name was whatever it is. But you're Kingsfield's daughter. And she said, my last name is Brown. I'm married. They stuck that in the movie, and I didn't want to have that in the movie. Because anyway. But everything else they did it. And then I got to write the scenes that we need, like the scene that describes the Socratic method. I wrote that. So I felt good about it. The television show, on the other hand, was to do a television show, you cannot have a guy who is just nasty through and through. There has to be something likable. And so, Kingsfield might be nasty to somebody's face, but then he's going to go around behind and save the day or help that person, and so it's a really watered down version. But I think there were other virtues to it, but it's not.
Dare I ask who was the model for Kingsfield?
Well, Kingsfield was a composite, and we had there were, I look out here and I see Lloyd Weinreb and Larry Tribe, and I mean, these were the young professors when I was there, and they were just incredibly great teachers. But they were also these guys in their 60s who were really pretty nasty. They just were. They just were nasty people. So it wasn't like it was hard to find role models. You could find them all around. And so there wasn't anyone. A lot of people have asked me, was it Clark Bice? I've never met Clark Bice. I never took a course with him. I have no idea what he's like.
He wanted to be the role model, I can tell you that.
Well, it's amazing. I mean, Lon Fuller wanted to be the role model for Kingsfield. He had never really read the book, and he had not seen the movie, but he would tell people, well, John was in my contracts class and I'm the role model for Kingsfield. I'm like, but I didn't want to disillusion him, because he could never have been the role model.
That's funny.
Yeah.
So you and I were chatting before. At last count, Harvard Law School has become part of at least 27 major motion pictures. And I just wonder, it's also appears in many novels, it's also in other cultural works, it's referenced in various TV shows. What is it about legal education generally, or Harvard Law School in particular, that would become so salient in pop culture?
That's a very good question. I think it's, well, one thing is, it all builds on each other. So like Harvard has got this love story thing going. And that's really doing great stuff for Harvard. So like any corporation, it decides to, use other channels to keep that thing going. And the next channel would be the law school. So then the Paper Chase comes out. And I thought the next thing that would happen would be a business school television show, but it didn't. it stopped. I mean, Harvard Law School is the model for all law schools in the country. In my little law school in San Francisco, I just said to the dean that Susan Freewald once told me to say hello. Susan Freewald is this wonderful professor at my law school. You know, I mean, this is all connected.
Yeah.
The most important professors at my little law school all went to Harvard Law School. Yeah. There's just no way around it. So what are they bringing? They're bringing this model from the mothership, you know, all over the country. And that's really important. And there's just no denying it. The Harvard Law School is the mother of all law schools. That's, you know, so.
I like your tie.
You know, I did this for you. This is a Harvard Law School tie. So she knows I've surrendered completely.
So what advice would you give to current law students? What advice do you give to your current law students or people here who might be current law students about how to make the most of their legal education?
I think, you know, you gotta, I don't know where the important stuff is happening on the campus right now, but you gotta find those people, you know, and that might take a little bit of doing. I mean, like I found Larry Tribe, that was an incredible stroke of luck, you know, but I searched around to do that, and I found Lloyd Weinreb, you know, and I still use his book on justice, you know. So, you know, but you have to find them, so they have to do that, and they're not necessarily, you know, the big names or anything. You know, when I took Larry's course, he was teaching law and technology. You know, I don't know if he'd even thought about constitutional law, so, but it was fascinating. You have to find those people, you know, and then I think you've got to be open to what do I think? I'll tell you a story, and I don't know how this relates to it, but I think it does. So I was writing the paper chase in my third year of law school, and it had suddenly become a lot of work. So I thought, why can't I get credit for this? This is a good thing I'm doing. Mm-hmm. So I went to the associate dean, who was a very bad person. And he would later become the dean of the law school. And I said, could I get credit? Because there was an independent credit you could get for work. And he said, what are you going to write about? What is this thing? And I said, it's going to be a novel about Harvard Law School. He said, there's no way in hell I'm ever giving you credit. None. He said, just forget about it. I know what you're like. I know what that book would be like. So I got really mad, and I went and got the rules of the law school out. And it happened that if you could get an independent, there was English 3000, which was an independent study with a full professor at Harvard College. And then they had to let you take that course and give you credit. So I called up a guy named William Alfred. Now, William Alfred was actually a very famous professor, and I had heard that he just loved students. He'd written a prize-winning play called Hogan's Goat, which had established Faye Dunaway's name on Broadway. And I would actually meet Faye Dunaway, that's another story, through William Alfred. So I called him up and I said, look, I'm this law student. I want to write this novel about law school. Will you give me English 3000? I said, it's the only way I'm ever going to get credit at the law school. And he said, yes, I will. I said, would you like to see anything I've written? And he said, no. I said, that's it? He said, that's it. Bring the paper around and I'll sign it. I couldn't believe it. So he signed it. I took it back to the vice dean. It was the most wonderful scene. It was my incredible triumph of law school. Here it is. Here's the rule, you know.
Dare I say it was a triumph of legal education?
It was a triumph of legal education.
You read the rules? You
I
applied
did.
It?
I
It's
applied
excellent.
the rules. Anyway, it was, and that was also, when you asked what was good about the paper chase, that was, because Bill Alfred read the first stuff I wrote. And by the way, he also said, if this thing's going to work, it's got to be about the classroom. And he said a bunch of other stuff. And I went back, and he made me, I'm leaving something out. But he read the first stuff I wrote, and he looked at me and he said, Osborn, you know, this is the best work I have ever read from a student. Wow. I couldn't believe it.
Wow.
William Alfred had said this. He said, but there are a couple of things I think you ought to think about. Just a little bit, don't have to think hard because you're clearly really smart, but just think about it. He said, maybe you want to make this more about the classroom than other things that might improve it. So I worked harder than I've ever worked. I went back, gave him the revised pages, and a couple of weeks later I sat down with him and he said, John, I am so glad you brought in this new stuff. He said, because this stuff actually is pretty good. He said, the first stuff you gave me really stunk. He said, but if I had told you that, you never would have written any more. I mean, it was just, he turned out to be one of those wonderful people, I mean, he was an old bachelor, he lived in this beautiful Victorian house on Athens Street, and people would wander in. Eric Siegel would be wandering through, because Alfred was a professor of Anglo-Saxon, Siegel did Latin or something. I don't know what it was, but it was just all of these people were around. It was remarkable.
Wow.
Yeah.
So I'm going to open it up for questions if people here have questions to ask, but my last one for you is, how does it feel to be back?
It feels kind of cool, I mean, I love going into Langdell and seeing that you've still got the great columns and there's still some professors on the walls.
There are still some on the wall.
And, you get that feeling
we
like...
We now have some pictures of clients too, though.
Okay, but there's an edge there. I like that. I like that edge. I like knowing what it's about,
Great. Questions, comments? How many people have seen the film? Let me see. How many people have read the book? How many people have seen the TV show? Wow.
That's funny because the TV show is if you think about it, a TV show, just so many more people in the United States see it than any other kind of medium. It's just amazing. Yeah.
Incredibly dour and off-putting. He was so grouchy through that whole movie. Was that your intention? Is that the way you wanted him to be?
Let's repeat the question. So the question is...
The question is, throughout the whole movie, Houseman is really, really dour and grumpy, and is that the way I wanted him to be? I wanted him to be really imperious, I wanted him to be, using this Roman metaphor again, I wanted him to be like a Roman consul. I mean, he just wasn't taking any guff from anybody. And Houseman, actually, my wife is here, and she went to see John Houseman before I did, because I was busy, and she went with the director, and she came back and said, that guy is Kingsfield, because he could be that way. It wasn't a big stretch for him. He was used to being in control. So it wasn't, that's how we wanted him to be, just the way he was.
No twinkle.
No, not really no twinkle. I mean, he's pretty outrageous if you think back. Yeah.
Can you press the microphone button? Yeah.
Wow.
Thank you.
That work?
Yes.
Yeah.
Good.
Did you write any fiction before The Paper Chase, or was that your very first?
That was my very first, and in a weird way, the law school freed me up because I'd had a very bad experience in the college. I tried to get into a poetry seminar my freshman year, and the guy was like a TA who thought he was a genius, said, your poetry is terrible. You should not write. You should, he probably said something, a guy like you should go to law school. And so I said, okay. I mean, what did I know? I'm a guy from California. I didn't know this guy was from Harvard, so I stopped. And it wasn't until I got back in the law school that the law school said, it's okay now because you are a lawyer. You're going to be okay no matter what. So that's when I started writing. It wasn't, I had that whole wasted time because of that guy. His name was Stephen Sandy, and he did not get tenure. And I like to think he got, is teaching in Nome, Alaska or something. Yeah.
Did you have anyone in mind when you wrote? Did you have anyone in mind when you wrote the part for Hart?
For Hart? Well, I have had it's so painful to write a novel that I always thought that I should be the hero. So I was thinking of myself, you know. And I think that's okay, you know. And by the way, when they did the TV show, the producer came to me and he said, you know, the actor was James Stevens. He said, "You're going to be surprised because I think I found a guy who looks a lot like you." So that was kind of nice.
How important was the love story to your conception of the book?
Somebody, it was really, really important. But, you know, and first of all, my wife needed a part. But I'm surprised that didn't go over better. See, okay, here's how it is to write a novel. This is exactly how it is. Does anybody here want to be a writer? Okay, I want to tell you something, because this is important. So, I am writing this book, and I know this stuff is right, and Hart has met this mysterious girl walking across the Cambridge Common, you know? And now he's fallen in love with her. So then I've got these other plot strands going, and Hart has been invited to Kingsfield's party. And I'm writing along, and you asked if this was fun. I'm writing along, and Hart gets to Kingsfield's party, and over in the corner, and Ford says to Hart says, "Is that Kingsfield over there?" There's a crowd around somebody, and Hart says, "No, that's Kingsfield's daughter." And then it went off in my mind like an atomic bomb. Oh my God, that's Susan! It has to be! And I'm actually literally writing the scene, and I realize it then. And so it's interesting how it works, because, you know, it went off with my mind like an atomic bomb, and that's how I wrote it for Hart. So I literally just put my reaction into Hart's. And when writing is really going well, it's like that. It just happens for you in these magical ways. And then looking back, Susan had to be that person, had to be Kingsfield's daughter, you know, because she had to tell Hart, "You can do better, you know. You don't have to take this, you can do better."
Do you credit when writers say the characters want to do certain things?
Yeah.
And what is that about?
Well, I mean, if you set it up, it's like, you know, if you set it up right, then they do.
They have their own will.
They have their own will, yeah. So, yes, sir.
I was taken by a phrase that you used a couple of minutes ago, the stuff beneath the rules. And I've read a number of your books, and I'm always curious, is there anything behind the fact that many of the characters have single syllabic names, not Finkelstein or Fristowski or something, but Hart or Ford?
Well, I'm
going to repeat the question.
Yeah.
So the question starts with, is your comment that there's something beneath the rules, and then the question goes on, is there a reason why the characters have single word last names like Hart and Ford? Is that a clue?
Yeah, I mean, in my study group, that's how we called it, you know, by the last names. So I was just accurately reflecting. I mean, I was on the cusp. There were not very many women in Harvard Law School when I went. The same thing that happened when my wife went to medical school, you know. But just behind us were going to be tons and tons. So I mean, in a way, the paper chase is about a prehistoric time, you know. But to answer your question, so maybe when women are in the study group, everybody's calling each other by their first name. I don't know, but in my study group, we called each other by our last names.
Yeah, the last names are all monosyllabic. I'm just curious, as a reader, I'm usually mostly confused all the time, but I noticed that in your books, the male family names are monosyllabic.
Well, I mean, there's a really simple stuff about this. Hart is the guy who feels things. He's named Hart. Ford is the guy who is the driving businessman. He puts the study group together, he's going to do it, so he's Ford. He's like Henry Ford, you know. Anderson is the, you know, robot who knows everything, has studied everything, you know, and I don't know, but Anderson seemed like a name that would go that. So I was trying to get names that would go with their personality.
It's like Hawthorne or
Like-
Poe, who would give
Yeah.
characters names that were close
Yeah,
to
or
their
Dickens.
character.
Or Dickens would do the same thing.
Shakespeare,
And,
right.
and you know, I initially called, I called Kingsfield Mansfield because of the English connotations. And then somebody let me know that there was a real Professor Mansfield at Harvard Law School.
True.
I had not known that. So I thought I'd better not name him Mansfield, you know? So I couldn't think about what to name him. And then my dad said, my father literally said, call him Kingsfield.
Wow,
So I said, you're absolutely right. Thanks, Dad.
wow,
You know?
great.
Yeah. Yeah.
What process did you go through to get the paper chase published?
You know, you're not going to believe this, but this is, I'll tell you. So I'm working with William Alfred. It's the end of the school year, and I've written 40 pages that I thought were really good. And then I had ideas for more, but I wasn't sure how to get through this classroom stuff. So I said to Bill Alfred, do you think that I could get this published? And he said, yes, but you're not ready. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, you need to work on it and develop more before you go up against one of these editors. And I said, well, would you suppose, I said, that's okay, I know I'm not ready, but if you think I can get it published, will you help me get it published? And he said, yes, against my better judgment. So he gave me 3 names. One was Dorothy de Santillana, who was the head of the fiction department at Houghton Mifflin. One was Robert Giroux,
Oh, wow.
who was the head of Farrar Straus, and a third one who's, I don't remember now. So since Houghton Mifflin was in Boston, I sent it to Dorothy de Santillana. And I said, Bill Alfred said I could send this to you. Oh, he said, use my name. So Emily and I went away. I'd given them the book like on a Monday. That weekend, Emily and I went away. I got back, and there was a special delivery letter on my door, which said, we have been trying to reach you all weekend. Where are you? That was how I sold the paper chase.
Wow, wow.
And I tell you, if you got a good book, these guys are not stupid, you know. I mean, they will come and get it. It's not just that an agent doesn't want to represent you. Writing is really a hard road. Now, they may make huge mistakes, and they do, like Harry Potter and all those guys who didn't buy Harry Potter. But Harry Potter was an unusual book, you know. Yeah.
John, I was wondering, you wrote, I read it when it first came out, so I'm going to read it today, but you wrote that basically during law school, right? Did you find that made, did you think it was your best book, and did you think it was, because you had to do so many other deadlines and you could sort of just, were so eager to write in the little time you had, was that kind of helpful?
So again, the question is, you were writing this book while you were in law school. Was it helpful to have to juggle all your other activities and have precious time in which to write, and did that help?
I don't know, because I only got 40 pages done while I was, you know, working in law school. And I had to get, you know, 140 more pages. So then I took off the next year to do that, you know. So I mean, I think it was very hard to do, actually, to write while I was in law school. That's why I wanted that credit, you know. It was something I actually needed to get the book launched. So.
But it may have given you the emotional intensity necessary for the book.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's fair.
I mean, yeah.
So first, just a personal thank you, because I think you have represented the theater of the classroom better than anybody else. And I think my relatives are more impressed to know me because they saw the paper chase, and so they understand what we've been through. The question is, I remember reading the book and seeing the movie before I went to law school and being taken by the drama of it. And then seeing it with some friends after law school. And then I actually had a tradition at another law school of showing it to first-year students right after first-year finals. And there was a lot of laughter at the lunacy of what was happening to these students over the course of the year. And so I guess as you were writing it, did you think back and say how silly we were when we were going through this, or were you really sucked into what it was like to feel it and the drama of experiencing it?
This is, I don't know if you could hear this question, but this is an absolutely brilliant question. And I want to tell you something that so, given my personality, as I am writing those study group scenes, now the study group ends up they end up having these enormous battles and fights, and it all disintegrates over the course of the year. And as I'm writing them, I'm literally laughing so much I can barely type. I mean, I just thought it was absolutely hilarious. And so, yes, I mean, I'm not surprised. I mean, I thought it was funny, and I'm kind of taken aback when other people don't think it's funny. I thought it was hilarious that the study group could be so stupid, and kill themselves. I mean, but it actually, to an extent, happened in my own study group. So, and luckily we had Anderson. And, Anderson wanted to become the senior corporate partner of a large law firm, and he did. And he gave us all his outlines of every course. And I still have his contracts outline, which is incredibly brilliant.
How did your classmates feel about the fact you were writing this and whether they were depicted in it?
I don't. Well, I mean, two of the guys in my study group, including Anderson, are out in California and San Francisco, and I see them regularly, and they brag about being. Anderson brags about being Anderson. Even Bell brags about being Bell. I don't know if you remember. Anyway, so there's, that's, I mean, look, when I wrote the novel, The Associates about the Wall Street law firm, there was a lot of truth in it, and I thought I might get sued. And actually, the partners just were tickled to death to be in the book. Even if they were depicted as ruthless, horrible people, they loved it. And there were so many ruthless, horrible people in the law firm, I couldn't fit them all in. And I had lawyers who would come up to me, and they would say, Osborn, why didn't you put me in the book? I was horrible. I'm really horrible. So, no. And I mean.
Your other books include The Associates, The Man Who Owned New York, The Only Thing I've Done Wrong, and you're also a writer of the film version of a 1983 novel called The River Why. That's a great movie with William Hurt and Kathleen Quinlan. What's it like to work on a screenplay of something that's not your own work?
The River Why did not come out the way I wanted it. So for me, it was not a great experience. But I worked on it because I was very close friends with the producer. And then the producer, so I wrote what I thought was a very good script. The only way you could write that movie was you had to concentrate on something. It's a very big novel. And I wanted to concentrate on the love story. And he decided that he would add his own stuff to it. And at that point, I wrote it off because it won't work. It has to be a single dream. So, I mean, I loved the novel. I was glad to do it, but it was not a great experience. And I've had other, I worked for at least 15 years in Hollywood, and I had that happen to me on other occasions. And it's not, Hollywood is not a great place in many ways. So, you write something and they decide they want to change it. They can do whatever they want.
So when you teach law, do you think of the stories in the cases that you teach as stories?
Yeah, I do. And I think it's really important. And there's a wonderful book that tells the story of the cases.
Yes.
And in contracts anyway, and I love reading that.
Law stories.
But, this thing about the stories is fascinating. Anyway.
Well, it's true. There's now a whole series of books that
Yeah.
look at the stories that behind the cases. Yeah. And really one of the major things that lawyers have to do is learn to tell people stories and tell them in a compelling way.
And I think law school tends not to teach narrative very well. If you look at, like I teach wills and trusts, and you know, where does wills and trusts come from? You know, why are we doing this? You know, we know where criminal law comes from, we know where contracts come from, it comes from normal, important human activity. And so wills and trusts actually has a story. It comes from somewhere. It comes from gifts. Gifts have been important for thousands of years. But wills and trust courses have lost that concept. They no longer know what the narrative is, you know, where the law actually comes from, where it fits into the real human experience. And that's a danger in law schools, when the professors actually lose that understanding. So they can't draw on 1,000 years. They can't go back to Troy and, you know, and wheeling in the wooden horse and stuff, because they don't even understand the narrative of their course. Yeah.
Do you find it's interesting, challenging to teach students for whom visual culture may be more powerful than written words?
Boy, I don't know. I'm teaching at a very lovely, small Jesuit law school in San Francisco. And we have some great students, and then we have some students who aren't as good. I mean, Harvard Law School, everybody's pretty good. So
everybody's really good.
Everybody's really good, yeah. So there's a difference there.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know, I don't know how to answer that question.
Well, I know how to answer the feeling that I have right now, which is just gratitude for your gift to the world of a picture of legal education as something that's riveting, a little terrifying, but compelling, and also to give us a character like Hart, who has heart. And so, John Jay Osborn Jr., thank you for coming back to Harvard Law School.
Oh, thanks, Martha. This was wonderful. Okay, this is nice.